Why do you think so many people are struggling, and why do you think so many people struggle to acknowledge and realize that they are actually deep down unhappy?
I would say one of the reasons people struggle to acknowledge it is oftentimes when you acknowledge it, you have to do something about it.
Welcome to the Prime Life Project podcast, a place to help you unlock your full potential, both mentally and physically, to become the best version of you. Welcome back to another episode of the Prime Life Project podcast, a place to help you both mentally and physically become the best version of yourself. Today, I'm joined by Mr. Kevin Palmieri. Kevin, how are we?
I am doing very well, my friend. I am excited to chat, and I'm glad you have a short sleeve or a long sleeve shirt on, because you'd be making me look bad if you didn't. So I appreciate that very much.
Well, you say that it's one of the things, but I think it's all an illusion. It's just Mikey with the lights. It's all optical illusions.
Hey, whatever they're doing, it's working. It's working.
So today, as I just said to you off air, I'm really excited to talk to you because I don't know that much about you. I've done a bit of research into you, but again, it's always like enigmas. I'm a bit like, oh, interesting. Let's sort of see where we can go with this. And the key thing for me is me and Mikey have spoken about this a few times when we've done episodes, is about people hitting rock bottom. And one of my favorite things I've heard you say is that you said that you found out that rock bottom has a basement. So can we just take my audience back? Talk to me about this. Where did this journey all start for you? And can we talk about this rock bottom?
Yeah, of course. So I always give a little context just so people understand where I started. And again, you see where somebody is, and oftentimes you think where they are today is where they've been forever, and that just isn't the way it works. So I was raised by my mom and my grandmother. I didn't know my dad. I didn't meet my dad until I was 27. So that's definitely an important part of my story, just because I think I've had a chip on my shoulder for a long time. And now I'm trying to run the chip where the chip used to run me for a long time. But if you were to look at me when I was 25, you would see a young man who had his dream body. I just won a bodybuilding show. My girlfriend was a model. I had a high-paying job. I had a sports car. I had a new apartment. Everything from the outside looking in was amazing. There's no way this guy can't be happy. There's no way this guy can't be fulfilled. He must be crushing it. But I was pretty insecure. I was very scarce. I was afraid of my own shadow. I was not confident. I was not brave. I was not fulfilled. I was not excited for the future. One day, my girlfriend came to me and we lived together. And she said, Kev, I want to move across the country to California, and I want to chase my dreams. And I would appreciate your support in that. And I gave her every reason in the world why she shouldn't do it. You're most likely going to fail because of this, real estate, gas prices, whatever. Insert dumb excuse, because I was afraid of being left behind. So my initial rock bottom was my girlfriend came back to me and said, hey, I'm leaving. I'm leaving you. I'm leaving the state, and I'm going to go chase my dreams. And that's exactly what she should have done. The initial rock bottom was questioning, who am I? Who could possibly love this version of Kev? If you pair that with the fact that since my girlfriend and I were splitting everything, my bills just doubled. So now I don't even know how I'm going to survive. So I did a couple things. Number one, I tried to focus more on self-improvement, and that didn't last very long. The second thing I did, I tried to focus more on money. That's the thing that I went all in on. So I said, you know what? If I want to make these problems go away, I just need to make more money. So the beginning of that next year starts. I was in an industry called weatherization. So what would happen is we would go into buildings that were state-owned, and we would make them more energy efficient. That was our job. So we'd go into your gym, we'd go up in the ceiling where the roof meets the wall, we'd seal it, make sure the good air stays in, the bad air stays out. That was our job. And since I worked on state buildings, I made anywhere from $60 to $120 an hour, which was really good for somebody who didn't go to college. So I said, this is the year I'm going to make the most money. I got a promotion to a foreman. Awesome. That was the year that the company had the most work ever, but most of our work was on the road. So we were stationed in Massachusetts. I spent 10 months on the road that year. Every single week I was in New Jersey, I was in New York, I was in Connecticut, I was in Virginia, I was in Delaware. I was all up and down the East Coast of the United States, but I was making money, and that was in alignment with what I wanted. So we get to the end of that year. I have my final pay stub in hand. I open it up. I made $100,000 at 26. Awesome. But I had another one of those moments where I realized it looked like I was very successful, but I wasn't successful internally. I didn't feel successful. I wasn't proud of myself. I was having a lot of that inner dialogue, a lot of those voids. So I said to myself, This year, and for most of my life, I have lived unconsciously. I'm just going through the motions. I don't know what the hell I'm doing. What's the opposite of unconscious? Hyperconscious. So I started this podcast called the Hyperconscious Podcast. And the thought was, I want to have deep conversations with deep human beings to facilitate deep thoughts. That's really my goal. I fell in love with podcasting and I fell out of love with my job. I didn't want to travel anymore. I was not willing to do the stuff I was willing to do before. So I start calling out of work. I start leaving the job site early. I start showing up late, and I just want to do this podcast thing. But I don't have the belief that I can just leave my job and do this, right? I'm juggling two things, and it just kept getting worse and worse and worse. Eventually, my rock bottom basement, I woke up in a hotel room in New Jersey, probably 5:15 in the morning. My alarm clock goes off. I sit up, slide to the edge of the bed. I've done this 1,000 times, but that morning something was different. It was like there was 10 televisions on in my head at the same time, and every single one was on a different station. And one is saying, you're stuck here forever. You're never going to find a job like this. You can't leave. That's the worst idea in the sad history of bad ideas. If you do work up the courage to leave, what will your friends think? You make more money than all your friends. What will your family think? You make way more money than anybody in your family. And do you really think you're going to take this podcast thing and that's going to be the train that you ride off into the sunset? And I did not believe that was going to happen. In that moment, I felt that if I was to take my life, I would take my problems with me. Now, that is a dark place. That is a challenging place. That is a painful place to be. Luckily, I had a very tight group of people around me who I trusted. I reached out to one of my good friends who's now my business partner. I kind of walked him through what I was feeling, how I was feeling, what I was afraid of, what I was thinking. And he said, Kev, over the last couple of years, your awareness has changed, your habits have changed, your mindset's changed in a lot of ways, but your environments have stayed the same. I think it's time for you to change your environment. So 3 or 4 months later, I ended up leaving that job and then becoming a very broke entrepreneur, trying to figure all this out. And that really is where this, I guess, second part of my life started.
That's a really very, very similar path to myself in terms of the bodybuilding. I was doing my modeling, doing all this sort of stuff. And again, to the outside world, had this perfect life. Yeah. And then actually, when you realize you've got nothing, it's like, wow, that's quite a deep thing. I've taken a lot of notes here. We'll just get started here. There's so many places to go with this. For me, when it comes to awareness, it takes a lot to have the awareness. But this is the part where you're still working that job. So you've earned all that money, but then you've got the awareness that actually internally you're not happy. Were you quite an aware person? Because that's the kind of stuff that most people get taught or they learn about. Did you teach that to yourself? Is that something you've been studying when you're on the road, listening to podcasts, or literally just wake up one day and were like, I'm not happy internally? Like, how did you come to that awareness? Because that's very high level thinking.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I don't know that I realized that at the time that it was self-awareness. A couple things jump off the page. One, I think I had a level of self-awareness that was pretty high already, because I remember long before the podcast, like a year at least before the podcast, I did a Facebook video and the title was, Do You Deserve to Be Happy? And my thesis in this was, you deserve what you work for, right? If I want to be in shape, I don't deserve the body that I don't work for. Yep. And that was really my thesis. And even that's a fairly deep level of thought. So I think I was already probably higher than the statistical norm. The podcast I was listening to was Joe Rogan. And I remember, I mean, he had a lot of comedians and there was a lot of not so serious ones, but I remember he had one of his friends on, Duncan Trussell, and they had this conversation about how weird is it that we all do things that make us unhappy. And I remember I was laying in bed watching it on my phone, and I remember something clicked. I was like, wait, I'm unhappy. So I think for me, there was already a layer of self-awareness that might have been higher than the average. And I was listening to content that made me question the way I was thinking. So I think it was a mix of those two things. But a lot of it, I think, is just, I've always been a little bit different, Daniel. Like, I've quit most of my jobs without having another backup. Like, that's just kind of I didn't go to college because I didn't want to be like everybody else. So I think in some way, shape, or form, I've always tried to think a little bit differently anyway.
So it's like that zero option mentality, isn't it? Like, you leave your job with not another thing and then forces you into actually doing something. Whereas most people like to stay comfortable. You seem to thrive off the, let's get a little bit uncomfortable here.
Yeah.
It's quite interesting. It's not a normal way of thinking about it, which again is not a bad thing. I love the fact that I said you question your own thinking. I think that's something that people have lost the ability to do. Like people can't critically think externally, let alone internally, about the kind of the voice inside their head of what's sort of going on and differentiate other people's beliefs and opinions versus their own. I think it's a quite fine margin there. But I think the key thing there is you sort of noticed that you were unhappy and sort of connected with it. I think a lot of people are walking around, especially now after the last few years that we've had, in a very unhappy, miserable place. Why do you think so many people are struggling, and why do you think so many people struggle to acknowledge and realize that they are actually deep down unhappy?
I would say one of the reasons people struggle to acknowledge it is oftentimes when you acknowledge it, you have to do something about it, right? When you bring something from a place of imagination to reality, then it's like, okay, now how do I work on this? And that's an overwhelming thing. I completely understand that. I think one of the reasons there's a couple from my perspective. Number one, we are taught to find the path of the most profit. That's what we're taught. Make sure nobody ever said to me, make sure you go to college so you get a job that you feel fulfilled doing. It was make sure you go to college so you get a good job and you can afford a house and you can afford a car and you can afford a family. So this is always my frame. I think people have their P's in the wrong order. A lot of people start something from a place of profit and they try to convince themselves that they're passionate about it.
Yeah.
Where I think if you start something from a place of passion, you convince yourself you can find a way to make it profitable. And that is a completely different life. And I think the other piece is many of us don't understand that we're actually, as human beings, and this is just my belief, we're looking for fulfillment. We're not looking for happiness. I can tell you and I are very similar, right? Regardless of how this interview goes, I will be fulfilled. I will be happy if you like me, right? It'll feel good and I will value that. But regardless, I am in the process of doing what I should be doing. I will be fulfilled regardless. Even if you have a bad workout, you're still fulfilled if you enjoy exercise and you enjoy the pursuit of your potential. So I think it's a couple of those things. I think we're set up to chase profit, when in reality, profit can bring momentary happiness, but it's not going to bring fulfillment. Fulfillment is an inside job. That's an inner game. And that's you understanding yourself at a pretty deep level. And then I would say the last thing is a lot of us, we look around and we don't understand that it's not necessarily jumping from brown grass to green grass. And all I mean by that is if you're unhappy, you might say, well, there's nothing I can jump immediately to that's going to bring me happiness. You have to figure out what's your mud. So no matter what, if you're facilitating a change from place A to place B, in between those two places, there's some sort of mud. All I mean by mud is conflict. So you might have to work a job that you dislike for a year and a half while building up your side hustle. Or I circumstantially was in a place where I could just quit my job. I didn't have a family. My car was paid off. I lived with a best friend. My mud was being broke for 2 years. That was my mud. You have to figure out what's your mud and then choose your mud accordingly.
So what you're willing to almost sacrifice and put up with to get the sort of end goal. But I think a big thing here, I was going to loop back to this because you mentioned something earlier on and you didn't mention it, but I wanted to talk about that, about fear, because we've kind of mentioned it before as well. Like to actually have that awareness, it's hard because it then means you've actually got to do something about it. And people don't often do anything about that through fear. And again, what he's mentioning there is that people want to have this change, but actually it's that fear of the unknown. So how did you overcome that fear and how do you coach people to come through that? Because ultimately I believe that's what keeps people stuck and in a place of unhappiness is the fear of change. They don't like change. They're comfortable where they are. And how do you facilitate that for people?
Yeah, I would never suggest people do what I do because I did too much change too quickly and I was anxious and I was having panic attacks. So don't do what I did. I think you have to break down the fear and the change into the smallest amount possible. So this is my analogy. A lot of us, we've never worked out before and we want to go squat 1,000 pounds. If you don't understand contextually what squatting 1,000 pounds is like, it's it's saved for the best of the best of the best of the best. Like, the strongest people on the planet can do that. Nobody else can. If you're thinking to yourself, well, I am so afraid to start my own business and leave this one behind. Okay, what's the smallest step you can take? I think that's where a lot of people get stuck, Daniel, is we're looking at the summit and we don't understand that you have to start at the very bottom and figure out what's the first peak. You don't have to worry about doing a speech in front of 5,000 people. You have to worry about getting confident enough to do a speech on Facebook Live.
Mhm.
That's the first barrier. And that starts with you picking up your phone and having a conversation with yourself and not
Listen,
showing anybody.
It's even worse, I think, in the Facebook Lives because you can't see anyone's reaction. You just
That's
there
fair.
like, this is a bit uncomfortable. Like,
That's
again,
fair.
it's bizarre. Like I was saying this to my coaches in a team meeting I had yesterday. Sometimes I get more nervous talking in front of my 6 coaches than I do talking in front of hundreds of people because it's like they're there and I know that they'll call me out on stuff and judge me hard. Whereas when I go as a guest somewhere, they're kind of obliged to pay attention and it makes me laugh so much. But again, the Facebook Lives, like, oh, so simple, but actually you can't see people's reaction.
That's fair. It's fair. The reason I use that story as a speaker, right? Yeah. I'm terrified of speaking. I still am. It happens. But I had somebody reach out to me and she said, I want to be a speaker. And I said, awesome. What have you been doing to speak? And she said, nothing really, because I'm so afraid of large groups. You literally just gave me the answer to why you're afraid to do the thing you want to do. Okay, cool. And this is what I said. I said, on a scale of 1 to 10, how outside of your comfort zone is it for you to do a Facebook Live? And she said, 12 out of 10. Cool. Let's not do that. On a scale of 1 to 10, how outside of your comfort zone is it for you to record a video to yourself and show no one? And she said, that's comfortable. Cool. That's not it either. What about if you recorded a video and sent it to me only? And she said, it's probably like a 5 or a 6. I said, awesome. Do that. Mm-hmm. Well, I'm just looking to build momentum. That's all we have to do. A lot of us are overthinking and under-actioning. I would rather you take the smallest action possible because at least if you're taking action, you can build momentum. So to the original question, I would try to break it down into the smallest form. Mm-hmm. And then number one, that's how you build a new habit. But number two, it allows you to see things from a new perspective. You might not be looking from the very top of the mountain, but you're looking from the first peak, which is higher than where you originally were. So new things seem possible. Break it down to the simplest form.
Once you get the momentum going, that it compounds, and people don't seem to realize that. And I love what you said there. There's a lot of good things we're saying. Like I said to Kevin, I didn't know much about it before we started. I didn't know where this conversation was going to go, but already I'm enjoying this. I'm almost disappointed we've only got an hour because I'm definitely going to have you back on, I think. But
please.
So with this, when it comes to beliefs then, because this is fundamentally for me, people's belief in themselves. So fundamentally what you have, like you sort of said there, people struggle and they don't think they can do something like public speaking, let's say. They're not necessarily afraid of the public speaking. That is just how it's coming across. What they're actually afraid of is the rejection. Mm-hmm. That's what it kind of boils down to, essentially, that deep-rooted belief in themselves. So have you noticed when you're working with clients and they're taking these small steps, which is exactly what I say, by the way. I say to clients, how do you climb a mountain? 1 step at a time. It's that same thing, just 1 step at a time. Just keep going, builds up. So when you've got people with these very deep-rooted beliefs that are, again, self-limiting, do you do any work on that with clients? Because for me, what I tend to find is if you actually shine some light on this and start to unpick it a little bit, it then gives people the awareness of why they're afraid of certain things, if that makes sense. Because people don't know. For me, I feel fear is ignorance and just lack of understanding. So if you can just sort of shine light, well, actually, this is why you're afraid, it almost then loses its weight a little bit. It's like, so you're not afraid of public speaking, you're afraid of judgment. Let's just work on that a little bit. Does that make sense?
Yeah, 100%. It's an identity level thing. Right? Our identities are what determines whether or not we're willing to do something. And if you don't understand how your identity was formed, that's why the self-improvement thing is so hard, Daniel, because on a podcast episode, you'll get motivated, you'll get inspired. Here, you and I are digging deep, which is wonderful. But it's the behind the scenes, somebody saying, all right, what happened to you when you were young that made you feel like you were a failure when you got rejected? And then you just sit. And let's just hear it. What do you got? Let's hear it. Mm-hmm. And then from there you say, okay, what have you done to prove that wrong? It's this weird thing where we create these self-fulfilling prophecies where, okay, if you were raised, and we'll just use this as an example. If you were raised in a household where you were told you're not smart enough, you're too stupid, you're not a good speaker, you'll never succeed at school, what are the odds you're going to try to excel at school? What are the odds you're going to try to take honors classes? What are the odds after school you're going to go to university or college? You're not going to believe you can get in. That's not who you are. That's not your identity. You're somebody who's not smart enough, or so you've been told. For me, Daniel, I'm 5'4". I am insecure about my height. That's one of the reasons I think I've gone to the gym so consistently because that's something I can change. Yeah. Now, I know that started for me at a very young age where I was insecure about being the smallest person on the team, the smallest person in my grade. I can connect those. I remember I was at a party and I approached these two women and I was flirting with them and I got rejected outright. And I think it was because one of them said, "You're shorter than us. Like, we would never date somebody shorter than us." And that was brutal. It was the worst, but it wasn't as bad as I actually expected. And that's the interesting thing is it's this weird thing where, yeah, we can talk about identity and we can talk about identity shifts and we can talk about being brave and being courageous. The best way to overcome a fear is to face it and have it happen to you. And for you to realize, oh, you know what? It's not that bad. It's way more in my head than it is in reality. It's way more in my head than it is. And I've made it into this monster that it really isn't. Last thing I'll say on this, you have to look at the proof that's the most recent and relevant. The problem is most of us do not have recent or relevant proof when it comes to facing our fears. The last recent proof we have is us not doing it. And we don't really have that much relevant proof. So if you're thinking of putting courage into a bucket, it's a pretty empty bucket, which again, is not going to help you build momentum.
I think it's also a big thing with this as well when it comes to the beliefs. It's understanding that a lot of these beliefs are things that we've done to ourselves. So like you mentioned there about the height, as you mentioned, you said that, I think they said. So they may or may not have said that. However, the stories that we create in our head. So I was having, literally this morning, I was having a conversation with my barber about how the gentleman, his business partner, he basically said to me a couple of months ago, he turned around and said something along the lines of, I used to think you were a bit of a dick. However, now I've actually, because they've known me for 6-7 years, so they've seen who I've become and who I used to be. And they're like, but actually, I love when you come in now. Like, you're such a different person. And I actually enjoy you coming in. So I basically said this to my barber and said, that was really nice of him. And then my barber went, I don't think he actually said that. And in my head, I was like, oh, I was like, that's interesting. And I said, maybe I've done that to myself. And I said, because I felt like I was a dick. Obviously, I've done a lot of like this deep-rooted stuff. And I realized I wasn't necessarily the nicest person. And he went, yeah, I definitely think you've done that to yourself. But isn't that interesting how we create this story and this narrative that we then hold as a belief that, again, it's got no factual proof behind it. And then we just hold on to this story constantly as we're going through our life. And then this whole identity gets formed on, I'm too short, I'm not smart enough. It's funny that you mentioned about not being good enough. One of my teachers said to me in history class, in front of the whole class, you're never going to amount to anything. So that for me was something that if I look at my life, self-sabotage, because I couldn't get past that belief that I had that I'm never going to amount to anything. So as soon as I start to get any success, I'm a destroyer, whether it's in relationships, financially, business. And so many people are walking around with these beliefs. And again, they are self-induced. Like if you got bullied at school, okay, well, that's not been for 10, 15, 20 years. You're now bullying yourself internally. And it's almost like a bittersweet pill when you tell people you're doing this to yourself, but you can change that. Do you also find that it's almost like an empowering thing for people when they realize they're the only person that can save them?
When you give away blame, you give away responsibility and you give away opportunity for change. If it's Daniel's fault, I was late today, I don't have to change anything. It's like, well, that's on him. He didn't send me the link fast enough or whatever. Right. And that's not the case. Just in front of the scenes. I had it in plenty of time and I was on time. But just as an example, when we give away blame and it's somebody else's fault, it also becomes their responsibility and we're giving that away. So it definitely can be empowering. This is what I will say. There is such thing as too much awareness too quick. That is a fact.
Yes.
You could, and you're in the industry, so you understand, you have to, the level of feedback you can give to somebody is based on, number one, their level of belief. Number two, the level of the relationship. If you just met somebody, the last thing you should say is something that's too hard. If you've known somebody for 25 years, you're probably the person to give them the hard truth. I was with my business partner in Toronto a couple of weeks ago, and he said something. He's like, yeah, I'm only, 10 pounds from being in the best shape I've ever been in. And I said, I mean this with love, brother, but you're delusional. Like, you do not look good. And he said, there's very few people that can call me out on that, but you're one of them. That's why I did it, because I know that I can actually say that to you, where if somebody else said it to you, it might not land. Or on the other side, a lot of people are gassing you up. A lot of people are saying you're crushing it when I know you're not. I've seen how good you can be. So it's there's a fine line on each end, but the relationship usually dictates the level of feedback that you can give somebody. And even at a deeper level, Daniel, this is the interesting thing. There's two things that can happen. Somebody might look at you and say, hey, I used to think you were kind of a dick. Maybe you were, or maybe they were insecure and they've been doing a lot of work on themselves recently and they realize you were just really confident and they weren't. So that's a whole nother conversation. Is you are a mirror for people's fears. You are a mirror for people's self-love. self-sabotage, whatever. As a human being, you are a mirror for other people. And what they see is usually dependent on what they are in a way.
That people need to stop and just rewind and listen to that, because that right there was gold. Like that, what you just said there is absolute gold. To clarify, I was definitely a dick in this sense, but I know exactly what you're saying. And it's a key thing, like the mirroring, like people don't seem to understand that. And again, me and Mikey spoke about this before about the self-development. I'm not sure if you were similar to this, but when you first start to gain this awareness of things, you almost become preachy and try and force it down people's throats. And then basically you're not meeting them where they're at. And again, you've got no place or right to do that with people. And again, it's understanding what level are you at with people. For example, your mate right there, he will actually value the fact of, wow, actually, you know what? Kevin's got my back. He's actually going to call me out my BS. Yeah. Again, same with Mikey. Me and Mikey have some real raw, honest conversations. And again, the whole point of that is that we're both trying to make each other better. So if I'm calling Mikey out on something or he's calling me out on something, I'm not getting butthurt about it. I'm just like, it may hurt and sting, but it's like, right, actually, let's go, because he's actually giving me some good feedback there. And it's understanding you've got to build that relationship first until you can actually then start to lane to people, where some people are like, I've got this information, here you go. And what you end up doing is just completely crippling and destroying someone because they're not ready to receive it all. It's a very bizarre concept. Yeah.
It's, you have to understand that with great power comes great responsibility.
Oh, and yes, Spider-Man.
You're the guide, right? Like, I think a lot of people think they're teachers. There's a difference between a teacher and a guide. A guide exists as the version of themselves that they are. A teacher is showing people the highlights of how to get what they want. I think those are two different things. I want to be a guide where I'm just talking. If something lands, like, that's awesome. I want it to land, but I don't want anybody to think that I'm here to make sure you learn something. I'm here to talk about whatever we're going to talk about. And hopefully through my words, something will get taken away. But there's a difference between me saying, you should do this. You should do this. And this is what's worked for me. And this is what I've noticed. And this is how I live my life. If you'd like to, awesome. If not, maybe it's not for you.
And that's why I like when talking schools. Whenever I'm going to public speak, because again, I get a little bit anxious before I public speak as well. And there's two quotes. I think Mikey told me one. I've heard another one as well. The first one is, the nerves of respect you pay the audience. And then the second one is like, actually, the nerves are showing you something good's about to happen. But what I always tell myself is, whenever I'm feeling a bit nervous before speakers, just add value. Yeah. Just add as much value as you can. It's not about, like I said, it's not about teaching people stuff, because again, you don't know where the audience is individually. So it's like, just go there and add value. So all you've done today is, you've never spoke to me, Kevin, you don't know me. But in case if you're coming on this podcast, I'm just adding value, and that's it. And that's what you do again. And then you feel fulfilled because your purpose is to add value and actually help guide people. And I say, I love Star Wars. So I say to people like, I'm Yoda and they're Luke Skywalker. Like, they are the superstar of their life. I'm not here for my coaches, for my clients to be like, you have to do this. It's like, here's what's information. What do you think? And then it's like, get them to come to their own, like, you're almost empowering them in a way. And I think that's one of the biggest things. People have lost that sense of empowerment. They feel very disempowered. And it's what you've said before about the responsibility. How do you help people to take that responsibility? Because there's a lot of things in people's lives that they do have to take responsibility for, some of which they don't want to. So how do you work on that? Because I'm sure you've been in that situation yourself. I know I have. When you're doing that deep work, it's pretty hard to face some of that stuff. How do you work with that?
I try to help them set up some level of necessity or some level of goal that facilitates that. So, or at least requires that. It's very easy to set shallow goals. But shallow goals require shallow self-work. The deep, audacious, large goals that require you to work on the dark parts of yourselves, that's what's going to facilitate the most change. So I think a lot of it is it's the necessity. When we're talking about goals, what do you want to accomplish? Cool. Awesome. Who do you want to be? It doesn't matter what you want. Like, who must you become in order to get that? That's a different conversation. And it's a different set of habits. It's a different set of conversations with yourself. It's a different level of self-talk. It's a different level of meditation. I think it's about stripping away what does success look like to who must you show up as to be that version of success. And that's really where things get deep. And then you have that conversation of, all right, cool. And I love this exercise. This is a really good one. You say, I'm going to draw 3 lines down a piece of paper. I'm going to do old identity. What was your identity 10 years ago? Boom, 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 boom. Cool. What's your identity today? Boom, 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 boom. Cool. What must your identity be 2, 3, 4, 5 years from today in order to accomplish what you want and feel the way you want to feel? Boom, 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 boom. Cool. Are you closer to the past or are you closer to the future? Most people are closer to the past. There's your necessity.
Mm-hmm.
You're not on the right path yet. You're not going at the right rate yet. That's okay. This is the piece of awareness for you to understand that you're closer to your past than you are your future.
Mm-hmm.
That's okay. But now what do we have to do and who do we have to become? Let's get the train rolling now.
And that's the thing you mentioned earlier on, is then what steps can you take to then step into that new identity? And there's a really good analogy that I use with that is you've got to be willing to let go of that old identity. And that's the hardest part, because that's been your safety net. And the analogy that I use is it's like holding, it's like holding a soccer ball. So they're holding a soccer ball with two hands. That's your old identity. And I'm there with this amazing new identity for you. You have to let go of that old one before I can throw you the new one. Because again, as the Bible says, again, I'm not necessarily religious, but again, it says you can't serve two masters. So again, you can't serve these two identities. You can't be this broke person and be a millionaire. You have to make the identity shift. And as you sort of mentioned there, the first thing is that awareness of, well, who do you actually want to become? Cool. Now become that person, because you've got to be that person before you have that thing. You've got to have a millionaire mindset before you have the millions. You've got to have that happy mindset before you become happy. You can't be thinking of the negative past stuff and then be happy if it's not in congruence with that, if that makes sense. And people just aren't taught this stuff, which is why I get so passionate talking in schools about it, because you see these kids, they're 15, 16 years old, and it's like, well, I didn't know any of this stuff. It's like, no, but again, this is where adults struggle, because it's all kind of developed, as it were, in secondary school. Did you kind of notice that yourself in high school? Is that where a lot of the stuff for yourself kind of got deep rooted?
Yeah, for sure. I had a very, very, very negative relationship with quote unquote failure. And I think that's why it's so hard to pivot when you get older. It's very hard to start something from scratch. How hard is it to be a beginner in fitness? Like after you come back from an injury and you're used to being so strong and you have to start from scratch, it's the most demoralizing thing in the world. I've been going through, I'm on the other side of it now, but I was going through shoulder pain and I literally had to learn how to bench press again. And it was terrible. I'm going in there benching the bar.
I've been there.
Right?
I've been there.
How challenging is that? Now, the reason is because as you get older, I think I don't want to say desire failure, because I don't know if you ever desire it. I think we put up with failure less because it's a worse mark on us as we get older. I'm 40 years old. I shouldn't be failing. I should be at a certain level. I should have this. I should have this. This is what society says I should have. When in reality, the people who are the most successful are also the biggest failures, because they fail more and more and more and more. So in high school, if I failed something, I got an F, it got circled, and that was the end of the road. Where as I've shifted more into the life I'm in now, I understand that failure is not failure. It's a piece of feedback. You can always do something with it. I've recorded 1,181 episodes as of today on our show. I've messed up on every single one of them. I messed up today. We recorded right before this. I messed something up, I'm sure. It's not the end of the road unless you quit. That's definitely something I had in high school, where if you fail, if you strike out, if you look bad, it's the end of the world. Now I just realize you're literally putting a quarter in the bank for tomorrow. Just make sure you don't make the same mistake over and over again, because that's more of a decision, but you're going to make mistakes. So yeah, that's definitely something I had when I was younger. I picked up when I was younger, and I've worked very, very hard and consistently on over the last 6 years.
I think that's the biggest thing with failure. For me, failure is the one thing that pushes you to the next level. If you've never failed at anything, you've never tried. And there's a real simple formula that I teach my clients. It's pain plus reflection equals progress. So when you fail, it sucks. It's always going to suck. Like anyone that tells you that oh yeah, you're going to mess up, it's going to be fine. No, it's not. It sucks. Like your ego's going to get hurt. Like you think you've done well, you fail. Cool. But again, you then get that pain, you then reflect on it. What could you've done differently, as you mentioned there, so you don't make the same mistake again? Why did I make that mistake, and what can I do about it? Because maybe you failed because of someone else. Okay, cool, but what responsibility can you take? Even if it's just 1%, cool, get better. And that's how you then make progress over time. And then by definition, that failure then becomes a lesson. You literally change the definition. It can either be a failure or a lesson, because it can't be both at the same time. And as soon as you like chat to people, they're a bit like, oh yeah, actually. And I use the example of athletes all the time. Like again, like LeBron James, for example, didn't just come out as the best basketball player at the moment. It just didn't happen. Like he'd have made constant mistakes, and then that's how he then progresses. And people don't seem to realize that. And for me, I think there needs to be a lot more responsibility in schools, because obviously when we get to our age, again, I'm 33, so 30s and 40s, I feel like we've got a hunger and a thirst for this knowledge, because we have quote unquote failed so many times. We want to do better. But I think people in their 20s, if they realized the power of learning from failures, they'll save themselves 15 years of their life
For sure.
because they won't be afraid.
Yeah. Our motto is prep, rep, reflect, perfect. So very similar to yours. Prep. I'm prepping for this speech. I rep. I actually do the speech. I reflect on what went well, what didn't. I perfect by fixing those problems. And then upon my next prep, I bring them in. So very similar. I just think it's one of those things where we're so used to seeing the polished product. I said something on a recent episode that really, really stuck with me. I don't think, well, there is no such thing statistically as overnight success.
Mhm.
What we see often is overnight awareness. Taylor Swift was the same Taylor Swift the day she went viral as the day before.
Mhm.
She didn't get any better necessarily. People just became aware of who she was.
Yep.
Overnight success is what a lot of people are chasing, when in reality, overnight awareness only happens if you do it over and over and over and over and over and over and over again, and you don't really ever plan on getting overnight successful. It doesn't, that's, if you're optimizing to look good all the time, you most likely will never be good. And that's just, you can use that in anything. Go to the gym and do your best lift all the time. I mean, yeah, you might be really good there, but you're not going to be well-rounded, right? Or, study a certain language. You're going to be really good at that language, but you might not be well-rounded. So yeah, it's one of those things where oftentimes when you look the worst, that's when you're making the most progress. But we live in this society where you're supposed to look good all the time. And that makes it a real challenge for sure.
Like in life, it's a case of, what's that old saying, in a team, you're only as strong as your weakest link. Again, as human beings, as the best version of ourselves, we're only as good as our weakest link. But if we're constantly focusing on the positives, which again is a great thing, like it plays to your strengths almost. Yeah. But you then have to develop those areas that you're not necessarily good at, because once they then become your strengths, then you've then got other areas, and basically you keep leveling up rather than just having one area that you're amazing at. Actually, just become better, well-rounded, because then if you're well-rounded, that will improve that one thing you're good at anyway. So for example, in the gym, if you're really good at bench pressing, cool. Well, actually, if you get really good at doing shoulder press and all these other things as well, it'll actually then help you improve your bench press. Yeah. If you actually train legs once in a while, which most guys don't do, cool. Well, actually, that training intensity of legs, you can't train as intently on any other body part apart from legs. So you get that level of intensity. You then try and match that in your chest workout. Again, everything you work on that weakness, it brings you up as a whole. And that's the thing. People are afraid, again, of failure looking silly by working on their weaknesses. But actually, improve on your weaknesses, you become almost unstoppable to an extent. So I really want to just sort of link back to what you actually do. Just talking about Next Level University. Like, what actually is this? Why did you set this up? I understand it's very similar to what we've been talking about, but I want to just nicely bring it around to this and what you actually do as a business. So what is Next Level University?
So Next Level University is first and foremost a podcast. So we have a podcast. We do 7 episodes a week. Every single day, we do a new episode. Our motto is self-improvement in your pocket every day from anywhere on the planet, completely free. So that's like the biggest thing in terms of front-facing that we do. But under that, we do one-on-one coaching. We do group coaching. We have a social media team that does people's social media. We have a website team. We have a podcast team. We do retreats. We do speaking engagements. We do live events. So our company is a self-improvement company. And the way it's set up is it's impact first. So if you don't have enough money to afford a coach, cool. We have the podcast every single day. We have a Facebook group. We have free events we do. If you're somebody who's more invested and you can afford that, cool. We have a space for you. Our goal is to have a space for you no matter where you are in your self-improvement journey or where you are in your financial journey. That's really why our business is set up the way it is. And honestly, that's why we do so much. That's why we try to produce as much content and value as humanly possible.
Is that hard to do?
Oh, it's the worst in the best way, right? But we did an episode yesterday or the day before. Did this year go as well as you had hoped? And for me, it went better than expected. Alan is the visionary, so he thinks we did terrible. That's why we balance out nicely. And I said, I think this year between our podcast and going on other shows, and I have another podcast, I think I did close to 750 episodes. And I was like, wow. That's a lot. I did 750 episodes this year. Like, that's wild. And that's something I'm very, very proud of. But in retrospect, looking back, that's why I'm burnt out. I mean, that's a lot. It's a lot to show up for. So it's the most challenging thing by far, bar none, but also the most fulfilling and rewarding.
That's what I was going to say to you. Is that, but again, the fulfillment and reward that you get, because again, people say that and they think, oh yeah, he's living his best life, not realizing how hard it is. People think that when you say, oh, we do a podcast, podcasting is very hard because again, it's energy transfer. Like we don't know the audience. Like you don't know my audience. So basically, you've got to try and gauge my energy and what I'm trying to bring. It's very, very hard from what people actually think it is. You can try and build relationships. I've never met you, and every now and again, you get ones like this where two people just click and you're on one. But sometimes it's hard work. And people just think, oh, you do podcasting. Yeah, it's not quite that simple.
Yeah.
And again, you create content. Yeah, it's not quite that simple.
Yeah.
But again, you're getting the fulfillment out of it. So why do you get the fulfillment out of this? Like, why do you do this?
I am a firm believer that if I had self-improvement in my life earlier, it would have looked different. And honestly, and I'll be very transparent, you might, so this is usually a surprise when I tell people this. I'm a tattooed bodybuilder who loves mixed martial arts and all things combat sports. Huge fan. Our audience is primarily women. Believe it or not, our audience is, and I'm so grateful for that. The upside of that is I've learned to be way more vulnerable. I've become a better communicator, and I've become way more inclusive and supportive. The downside of that is I have heard unlimited horror stories of how the members of our community have been treated by their partners. And there's that level of ego, that certain masculinity that has hurt a lot of people. And I aspire never to be that. Mm-hmm. That's one of the reasons I do it. And that's one of the reasons I do it in the way I do. I want to show people that you can be successful and kind. You can be successful and humble. You can be assertive and kind. I want to be an example of what's possible. And that's really the biggest reason I do it, is because I want people to feel safe in their learning journey. Yeah. There's a lot of people saying, you suck, you're never going to win unless you blah, blah. Like, that's leading with ego. That's leading with ego. And a lot of those people aren't taking their own advice. So that's really why I do it, is I want it to be a safe, inclusive place for people to learn, to grow, to meet other people, to get to the next level. That's it.
I love that. And again, it's almost, again, to where you sort of started there, it's being the person that you needed when you needed it, like for yourself. And then it's actually grown. And because you're doing it authentically from a place of good nature, you then automatically attract that right kind of person that sort of needs to hear that. And I love that. Again, there's a lot of stuff around toxic masculinity. Me and Mikey spoke about this quite a lot as well. And actually the fact of, again, you've actually created this safe space for people to learn and grow and be like, well, actually, you can get guys that are masculine and it's not toxic. And actually they are in tune with their emotions. They are this, they are that. And actually these people do exist, because that's also part of the problem as well. Like you said, you see these big entrepreneurial multimillionaires and they're just very aggressive. Which again is great. I love that. I love that sometimes. But as you sort of said, it's my ego that loves that. It's like, yeah. You get motivated, then you don't take any action. You need to understand all the stuff behind that, which isn't often necessarily shown, which again is why the podcast is so great, because you actually get to really get the core essence of it as well. So again, just to wrap this up, because I'm very cautious of your time. I know you've got another episode after this to record. What advice would you give to someone listening to this episode right now that is struggling, that has found that basement to rock bottom? What is that bit of advice that you would give them?
Oh, man. I would go twofold. I would say, one, if your life could look different in 5 ways, what would those 5 ways be? If you could make your life look different in any 5 ways, what would they be? And then I would say, all right, cool. What is one thing you can do under each of those 5 buckets? And usually what I say is I start very simple. We break things into health. We break things into wealth. We break things into love. Under health, if you want to be healthier, start weighing yourself. Simple. Get on the scale when you wake up tomorrow, write down the number, do it the next day. Under wealth, start tracking your finances. If you haven't looked at your finances in a long time, you're living by accident, not intentionally. Great way to make a shift. And then when it comes to love, every night before you go to bed, and this is, again, these are things I do. Every night before I go to bed, I say one thing I'm grateful for about my wife, and then she reciprocates. And that's just, it's this, Daniel. You're probably really good at something. You're definitely way better than me at something. But are you taking what's brought you success in that arena and then bringing that to other arenas in life? A lot of us are really good at business, but we suck at relationships. Why are you good at business? Consistency, self-awareness, right? You're thinking ahead. You're doing it intentionally. Okay, could you do that in fitness? Yes. Could you do that in your relationship? Yes. So yeah, I would say if you could facilitate a change in 5 ways, what would it look like? And what is the smallest barrier to entry for one new habit under each of those? I think that's a great place to start. And honestly, if you're struggling mentally, either seek out a mentor or seek out a counselor, seek out a therapist, get comfortable with somebody who you can talk about deep stuff with, because that is so important.
I love that. Honestly, I've wrote that down there. People are living by accident, not intentionally. That is again gold. I want people to really understand that. Most people are living by accident, not intentionally. That is gold. Kevin, genuinely, this has been absolutely awesome. This has absolutely flown by. Where can people find out more information about you?
Yeah, I always say just listen to the podcast, Next Level University, all the podcast platforms, YouTube. If you have any questions or anything for me, podcasting, anything, you can reach out. Kevin Palmieri on Facebook and LinkedIn. And then my handle on Instagram is @NeverQuitKid.
Awesome. Again, I get Mikey to put all the links in the show on the screen, and then also put them in the show notes as well. Kevin, thank you very much. It's been an absolute pleasure.
My pleasure.